Okay, this is the hardest part of movie making, I think. And to be honest, I don't know much about it myself. And if you look at movie makers, I would say that most movie makers, they don't know about finding a good story. Because of course, if you look at 10 movies in the DVD shop, at least 9 of them are just iterations of previous stories or just bad stories. So one of the most difficult things are finding or creating a good story. And I would say that making a good story is partly finding the story, because you take parts from reality. You take your memories that you have. You might have read something in the newspaper, or you might have seen something in the street or so that kind of triggered something, triggered a question in your mind. So that is what you find. But then, of course, you can't just take something that you find and make a movie about that. You have to make it into a story also. A story with a start, an introduction, a conflict, and an end. And this goes even for documentaries. Even if you just shoot reality, you could say that if you go out and shoot reality, you could say that you find your story in reality, but that is not really true. What you do when you do a documentary is that you find things in reality, and then you make it a story. One way of finding something interesting is to ask questions. If you see someone behaving strange, or if something happens, then you could ask questions. Okay, why did that happen? What was the cause of this? And then you could ask, okay, what was the effect of this? If you see someone stopping a car in a strange location, you could ask, okay, why did this person do it? And you could also ask, what will happen later? And this causality, that one thing leads to another, it is very, very fundamental for movie making. And by kind of asking questions like this, you can also find/create a story. Research is very, very important, of course, to make a story. You have to know lots about what you're making a story about. And I think there are two good things with research. One thing is that if you do good research, the movie will be more authentic, and you will have the audience more believe in your movie. And also the research can make you find new angles and new interesting stuff to include into the story. When you tell a story, you do it on different planes, so to speak. You have the action plane, and the action plane is what happens in the story. Like the character James Bond is jumping, skydiving from an airplane. That is action plane. Then you have the story plane, and that is how is this portrayed by the movie maker. Is it all a long shot? Is it edited between different cameras? Is it close up or long distance, and so on? That is the story plan. And then you have the subplot. What is the meaning of it? What's the point of this? And I think it helps when you write the script to think of those 3 levels. What is it that you want to tell? How do you tell it by making things happen in the story? And how do you show this to the audience? And talking about writing a script and showing the audience, in a script you usually don't include directions about the camera and so on. The script only describes what is happening in the story. You seldom add instructions about the camera or so in a script. But nevertheless, what the character is doing in the story is part. You don't have these perfect lines between action plane and story plane. There are a kind of mix between them. So you have, in some aspect, a kind of story plane in the script also. What is it that you make the audience know, for example? Conventionally, you talk about a 3-act structure in movie making. You have, as we see in this image, you have a short introduction where you introduce the characters, the environment, and the conflict. And the introduction of the conflict is often the first plot point. A plot point is a major shift in the story. So the first act is setting all up on the table, so to speak, and then the first act ends. Some people say that the first act ends when the conflict is introduced, and then you have the second act where the conflict is deepened. If you have, for example, a struggle between a bad guy and a good guy, the conflict between them are escalating, almost like children getting into a fight, or nations getting into a war. It escalates, and maybe the two different, the bad guy and the good guy, the protagonist and the antagonist, maybe they get more people to help them, like in Lord of the Rings, where the protagonist get more and more people in this fellowship of the ring and so on. And then you have the third act when the conflict is played out, the final battle, the final struggle or so. And talking about conflict, sometimes the conflict is very obvious, like in a cop movie or a western movie. But the conflict doesn't have to be between a cop and a murderer or something like that. It could be a love story also. If one character loves another and the other character doesn't love her back, then you have a conflict. If you have a couple and there's a third person, you have a threesome and you have a conflict. And the conflict is between agents or characters, and often it is a conflict between two people. But the antagonist, the bad guy, so to speak, can also be something that is not a person. It can be natural catastrophes like a meteor or a volcano or so. But the hero is always some kind of person. It doesn't have to be a human, of course. It can be a dog or an ant, but it has to be some kind of entity. Okay. If you look at this 3-act structure, you see that in the middle there you have a second plot point. Very often in movies you have a point with no return. Like, for example, if you think of the love story about a threesome, there is let's say that you have a couple and one of the persons are unfaithful. She is having an affair with another man. When she decides to tell her boyfriend about this, that is a point of no return, because she can't undo it. And it forces the story into a kind of slope down towards the final conflict, the solution of the conflict. So that is very often you see that in movies, the second plot point or point of no return. And in many movie making books you have this 3-act structure, but if you read some academic literature, there are comments that even people think that that movies have this 3-act structure, but in reality, even the typical Hollywood movie have a much more complex situation. And some academics claim that there is a 5-act structure and even 7-act. And personally, I would say agree on the 5-act structure. And there are different theories about these acts and the division between them. And I think that you shouldn't believe that one movie has one act structure. One movie can have different act structures depending on how you analyze, how you interpret the movie. And thinking about this figure here, this one really has 4 acts: the introduction, the deepening of the conflict, then the deepening of the conflict after the point of no return, and then the climax or the final conflict. Then you have the conclusion also. That is basically the short segment in the movie at the end, where you see that everyone is happy and everything is fine, and the hero rides off into the sunset or whatever. Because it's very seldom that the movie ends abruptly when the conflict is over. You always have this conclusion, kind of finishing it off slowly.